So I was scrolling along today and I came across this map. You've probably seen something like it. Bright colors, lines everywhere, showing you who trades with who. Interesting. Africa's trading billions. Okay, that's not nothing. But the thought struck me, because if that's true, why does the conversation around Africa always sound like something's missing, like it's lacking? That's when it kind of hit me. The map wasn't lying necessarily. It just wasn't telling the whole story. Look, Africa exports gold. Africa isn't the only place with gold. Same with oil, same with cobalt. But here's the difference. Africa supplies a huge share of these resources to the global economy and captures a small share of the value created from them. That's the imbalance. Gold ends up in medical equipment, electronics, circuit boards, stuff we depend on every day without even thinking about it. Africa exports oil. That oil turns into fuel that moves planes, ships, and trucks. It powers the supply chains that keep food on the shelves and packages showing up on time. Africa exports cobalt. And this is where it shows up in everyday life. Cobalt powers my phone, your laptop, my laptop, your tablet, your electric car if you've got one. So when you scroll, when you swipe, text, stream, you're holding Africa literally in your hands. Which is wild, because I've never really understood how racism even exists. Your whole life is stitched together with other cultures. The technology, the music, the food, the clothes, but people are where the line gets drawn. That part has always felt, well, lacking. But I digressed. Here's what the map doesn't show. Africa exports the raw material, but the refining happens somewhere else. The manufacturing happens somewhere else. The branding happens somewhere else. And the biggest share of the profit usually lands somewhere else too. And unfortunately, none of that is accidental. Because when outside companies show up, they don't show up broke. They show up with money bags. They show up backed. Loans, insurance, export banks, government support. Meanwhile, local entrepreneurs who are told to be patient, to bootstrap, to wait their turn. So, for example, if two people wanted to dig for gold, and one shows up with government-backed financing, and the other one shows up with personal savings and optimism, who do you think wins? Exactly. Okay, I want to just slow down even more right now. So when we talk about ownership, it's easy to picture offices and investors, but a lot of Africa never gets invited to the conversation. There are rural communities sitting on land with real value where people don't have access to financing, they don't have access to information, and in many cases, they don't even have reliable electricity. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack drive, but because the system never showed up. If you don't have power, you don't have internet. If you don't have internet, you don't have information. If you don't have information, you don't even know what questions to ask. You're not thinking about mining rights or ownership structures when you're selling small things on the street just to survive the day. That's not about ability. That's about access. And that's a different conversation entirely. Even before ownership comes up, Africa is often treated like a single country rather than a continent. Nobody talks about Europe that way. You never hear Europe needs help without asking which country. But Africa, it gets flattened. Valuable, necessary, but disposable. Ownership becomes optional. Which brings me to something actually that gives me real faith. People like iShowSpeed, the YouTube live stream sensation, and the generation he represents. That generation grew up online. And despite all the flaws, information is moving faster than control. Young people across borders learning from each other in real time. When I was younger, you needed permission to know. Now curiosity is enough, and that changes everything. The work isn't done. Ownership still matters. Infrastructure still matters. But pressure is shifting because Africa isn't poor. Africa is underowned. And once access expands and the people on African soil who are doing the most stop getting the least, everything changes.